an entrepreneur who has failed in some sort of endeavor may be a better CEO of the next company that they start than somebody who simply had a good idea and is doing a startup.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley in partnership with Leumi Tech and sponsored by Hippo Insurance, Turing, Upwest Labs, and Hillel at Stanford. Sometimes one needs to go on a long trip to discover where he came from. Meet Aryeh Green, Chief Strategy Officer at Gigawatt Global and author of My Israel Trail. Aryeh is the author of My Israel Trail, Finding Peace in the Promised Land, about his hike on Shvil Yisrael, the 700-mile Israel National Trail, and meeting personal challenges, and is the Chief Strategy Officer at Gigawatt Global, a renewable energy platform for Africa based in Jerusalem. Aryeh is a former senior advisor to Natan Sharansky in Israel's Prime Minister office and was the founder and director of MediaCentral, a Jerusalem project of HonestReporting providing services for the foreign press in the region.
Aryeh Green, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks very much, Michael.
Aryeh, this is going to be a different episode than we usually have. Usually we talk about a technology industry, we talk about a startup, but really the point of this show is extracting those nuggets of leadership and entrepreneurship that can come from anywhere. And I, as a technology enthusiast, I usually look for them in the technology sphere. But really, any leadership or any form of leadership that is in the technology sphere first comes out from our personal experiences throughout our life, right? And so I'm really excited to talk to you about your insights in this context. I'm excited to talk to you about your Israel trail, the 700-mile trail, and your journey and your insights. So Aryeh, please tell me a little bit about yourself and let's start going.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you for inviting me to be on the show. I don't know how much of a leader I am, but I like the idea of sharing whatever modest wisdom that I've gained in my life experience. I actually did work for many years in high tech, in business, and I actually today not in high tech, but am helping to run a company which is bringing renewable energy to Africa, and that's also I've learned a lot of lessons there. Infrastructure related, the issue of doing business in developing countries, and of course renewable energy. But I hiked the Israel Trail, the Israel National Trail, which as you said is about 700 miles long from the tip of the country in the south on the Red Sea up to the border with Lebanon in the north. And I did it all by myself.
Really?
In over the course of 2 months. Yep, over the course of 2 months with a 25 kilo pack, a 50-pound pack on my back, and wow. You may know this is kind of the cohort that hikes the trail here in Israel is usually kind of the post-army, young 21-year-old right. cohort. I was 51. I was 51 when I did it, and I did it for a very specific reason. I was kind of looking to clear my head, as somebody said to me, and get out after unfortunately a devastating divorce, something that I hadn't wanted, was not my choice, and this was really a way for me to almost literally move on with my life. And I learned a lot of lessons on those 2 months, and really lessons which came from the hike itself, the physical hike, but really helped me to meet the personal challenge that I was facing in terms of the pain and the difficulties of the divorce. And that's where the book came from. It was kind of 2 books in one, like a book about the hike itself and the geography and the history and the people of Israel, and then these 5 lessons that I learned to meet personal challenges that I learned along the way.
I just love this introduction, and I love the idea of the 5 lessons. So my biggest suggestion is let's run through these 5 lessons and share with me some of the personal insights that you've gained. I think that it's always incredible listening to the personal challenges that you've gone through and how you came on the other side with some insights that are general to problem solving and to tackling these personal challenges that aren't specifically to your situation, but they can be helpful in a multitude of situations. And I'm first excited to use the insights you're about to share with me on my own challenges, and hopefully they're also relevant for others. So please go ahead.
Well, thank you for saying so. And I have to preface anything I say with the remark that the wisdom that I gained on this hike, as I said, came from some of the physical challenges and emotional challenges that I was facing. But really, it's based on the time-honored wisdom of our sages in terms of Jewish tradition and our heritage, and philosophers and therapists and others over the course of the last few generations. And that includes Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes.
And so many others that I was exposed to. Leo Buscaglia down at UCLA in our native California, who wrote a lot about love, about acceptance. So the 5 lessons, it's kind of hard to sum them up, but I can and I will in just 5 words or 5 phrases. Obviously, the book itself, each element, each lesson has at least 1 chapter, if not 2, as I hiked through the silence of the desert and the hills of the north of Israel and along the coast and up to and back from Jerusalem. But those 5 lessons I can sum up relatively simply. The first was humility, this kind of sense of modesty, especially trudging hour after hour, day after day through the silence of that desert in the Negev in the south of the country. Understanding the importance of recognizing our place in the world, not to minimize our own challenges and problems, but just to put them in perspective, in a perspective of sorts. And humility was the first lesson. And the second was acceptance. And I can't go into the whole story, we don't have enough time, but there were a number of times that I describe in the book that I was on the side of a cliff and I didn't know what to do, and I had to make a decision, and I basically said to myself, Aryeh, accept it. Here's where you are on the side of a cliff. You need to now figure out what your next steps are going to be. And so that acceptance, that recognition of reality was the second lesson that helped me, for instance, recognizing I never expected to find myself divorced. Here I am. Figure out what you're going to do next. The third lesson was one of gratitude. I developed a keen sense of appreciation for just everything, for the privilege to be able to hike this land of Israel, to the privilege of living here in Israel after 2,000 years of our peoples being dispersed and now coming back to our ancestral homeland. The appreciation that I had for my friends and family who supported me in the difficulties that I was facing. And the truth is, even at the end, as counterintuitive as it may sound, a sense of gratitude for my former wife, for the life that we had built and lived together for 30 years, 3 children, building a home and a life and a community here in Israel. So that was the third lesson, gratitude. The fourth lesson was probably the most difficult for me, and can be, I think, for many others, and that was forgiveness. The not just intellectual sense that my wife is an adult woman, she can make her own choices, I have to respect that, but more of a heartfelt, kind of gut level sense of forgiveness of the hurt that she caused by breaking up our family and the pain that she caused me. And I learned that lesson from a number of different elements on the trail, which again, I can't go into details, but one of them was walking along the northern border with Lebanon and thinking about the Arab-Israel conflict and how a sense of forgiveness is going to be a very important part of any steps that we want to take towards real peace in our region.
Right.
Both of these communities are going to have to learn how to forgive each other for our either past actions or whatever grievances or perceived grievances there might be. So those were the 4 initial lessons, and those 4 kind of combined together, this humility and acceptance of what is, and gratitude for the blessings in my life, and a sense of forgiveness for those who've hurt us, kind of combined together on the last week or 2 of the trail when I was heading home. And I recognized, I had a goal. The goal was to hike the trail. And I had a goal every day to get to the end of that, whatever that segment was that day, and get to wherever I was supposed to sleep or camp, or where I had put some water to wait for me in the desert. And obviously, my wider goal was to get on with my life, as I said, to find ways to move ahead. But I realized there a week before I arrived home, okay, now what? I've got to have some sort of, and that's where the ideas of goals, of having a real and concrete set of objectives, whether personal or professional, to be a better father, to find new love, to open my winery, having been a vintner. I've made wine as a hobby the last 20 years or so here in Israel. To change careers and move into renewable energy with my friend Yosef Abramowitz, instead of continuing the work that I had been doing in the government and in the nonprofit sector and in the business world. So that idea of having a sense of goal, of purpose, that brings me around to Viktor Frankl's incredible work, the lessons he learned of facing his own challenges, which of course was the Holocaust, where he discovered and developed a whole theory of psychotherapy called logotherapy, where he discovered that people with a reason to live, with a goal that they set for themselves, were more likely to survive in the camps. And so that for me was the fifth lesson, obviously on a more mundane level, not at that terrible and tragic situation, but for all of us, whatever pain or suffering that we're experiencing, the idea of having a goal, of having an objective, having an aim that we can strive for, gives our life meaning. And so that was the fifth lesson.
So take me back to the beginning of your decision to go on this Israel trail. You're about to embark on this 2-month, 700-mile, very lonely, solitary, and oftentimes dangerous journey. You're hoping to find. It sounds to me like you're hoping to find some clarity as to the current situation, the current emotional state that you're in. You end up finding that clarity mainly in the in the solitude, right? In your head, in your thoughts, whether it's a metaphor for the Arab-Israeli conflict, for this acceptance, or whether it's the cliff, or acceptance was more the cliff that you had to cross, but for the forgiveness on the Arab-Israeli conflict, and this idea that in order to really have peace, whether it's peace at home or peace with our neighbors, we first have to learn to forgive in the gut and not in the mind. Can you extract a little bit about how we can, how can we again extrapolate these to our everyday things? How can we, besides just reading about it and thinking about it, but really comprehending what's the core issue and how we can then, investigate how we're dealing with it?
Well, I think we can combine a few things which are relevant for all of us. I'm sure you've read, especially with this series that you've been hosting now for so long. I'm sure you're familiar with Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and Principles of Leadership and what have you. There's no question that setting goals are a very big part of that for all of us. Daily goals, weekly, monthly, yearly, 5-year goals, lifetime goals, etc. I think for a lot of us, this issue of acceptance can be even on the most simple level, whether it's, you trip and stumble physically and injure yourself, or you trip and stumble in a relationship or in a work project. And the idea of recognizing, in the venture capital world, there's an understanding that an entrepreneur who has failed in some sort of endeavor may be a better CEO of the next company that they start than somebody who simply had a good idea and is doing a startup. In other words, failure itself is something we learn from, and acceptance and humility, both humility and acceptance, are a big part of that. And I think when we talk about leadership, I speak a little bit about this in my book. We can go back to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses, in leading the children of Israel. The defining characteristic of Moses in the Bible is his modesty, his humility, which is a little bit counterintuitive, because you expect a leader to be, out there charging in front and telling people what to do and thinking that they know it all. And yet, I think for all of us, that sense of modesty and understanding that we don't know everything, and that we're just we're an important cog in a wheel, but we're just a small cog in the wheel. We're just playing whatever role it is that we're playing, and everybody has an important role to play. I think that's an important, at least, takeaway that I had from that first period in the desert, connecting, as it were, to our people wandering through the desert, the children of Israel wandering through the desert, our prophets getting most of their inspiration in the Judean desert and elsewhere. That kind of a connection for me kind of brought it all together, and it brings me back to this idea of humility and acceptance.
I just love that. If you look back at your other experiences, you worked in government, in the private sector, in the public sector. Today, you're still active, with the renewable energy. Talk to me a little bit about how you're seeing, things that perhaps before it would occupy your mind or your emotions, would cloud your ability to be a good leader. That now, after this experience and after writing this book and this really contemplation, you're able to have much more clarity about it, shrug it off, or just go beyond it and say, you know what, this is not that important right now. I can go past this.
Well, it's funny because, again, the combination of humility and acceptance kind of brings us to that state of recognizing, or at least trying to recognize, what's really important. And prioritizing what's really important. And when you're out there hiking the trail and you've got a backpack and literally everything, your only possessions, the only things you need are your water and not even necessarily a change of clothes, but at least, a warm sleeping bag. With your needs reduced to such a basic kind of subsistence level, yes, right. It gave me great perspective. And that's obviously one of the things that helped me to not just meet my challenge and get over my sadness and my anguish and my pain, but also to look ahead. And the truth is, there's also an element of understanding if we have that perspective of recognizing that not everything is about us, then we also can be open to different kinds of possibilities for ourselves,
right?
And priorities that we weren't necessarily, not that we take them for granted, but I talk about the gratitude I had for my friends and my family. I mean, I have always been a communicator. I've always been a connector and very connected with my friends and family. But the hike experience and these learnings basically made me even more so and put a greater priority on that. The truth is, it was true in the business, in my business experience as well. I always wanted and moved from different businesses and back and forth into the public, from the private sector into the public sector, because I wanted to do more good, as it were. But one of the decisions I took towards the end of the trail was I was going to leave the position that I was in and join this company doing renewable energy for Africa, because it was going to enable me to combine my interest in business and profit with an interest in doing something good for the world and doing something that I love at the same time. And somebody famous once shared with me, or somebody close to me, my wife now, shared with me that somebody famous once said, find something that you love to do and something that you're good at, and find a way to get paid for it. And there's a Japanese philosophy that kind of combines those three. Find something that you love to do and that you're good at and you can get paid for, with something that the world needs. And so for me, moving into building renewable energy, solar and wind, hydro projects in Africa, in some of the poorest countries on the planet, really does fill kind of all four of those categories.
I love that. Aryeh, in the short amount of time that we have left, I would love to pick your brain on some really key things that I should be keeping in mind for myself as I, approach this world of venture entrepreneurship and the things that I want to be, working on, and the challenges that I'll be tackling with. What are some really key things you would say to a young entrepreneur as they're just starting their journey, from, the wealth of challenges and experiences you've accumulated, in your experience?
Well, without question, one would be this issue of finding something that you love to do. Obviously, everybody needs to make a living. And I suppose within the business world, everybody wants to find a unicorn or be involved in some very successful business. But I think that that our generation, meaning my generation, and now then your generation, the newer generations, let's say, that have come in the last into maturity in the last few decades, recognize that there's a lot more to life than going to work and coming home and having a nice car. And whether it's climate change, or whether it's equality, or whether it's addressing food scarcity or health issues around the world, there's so much that technology and that the business world can offer to solve the world's problems. We call it, in the impact investment world, we call it doing well by doing good. And this idea of bringing a values lens to the business world is something that I would definitely continue to encourage the younger generation for a very specific reason.
I love that.
Because you can invent the most terrific new technology or platform or application or software, what have you, but in the end, you're not going to 10 or 20 or 30 years with all your wealth later feel the sense of fulfillment, or that you've contributed to humanity in the way that you will if that technology or that platform or that software comes to serve a social good, if it comes to provide an answer to one of the pressing social or health or environmental or economic problems that are facing the world today.
I love that, and I think that sense of responsibility and maturity, and taking ownership not just of our career, but taking ownership of society, and saying, if you have that urgency for leadership and innovation, then part of that urgency and part of the responsibility that you have innately by being a leader is to be a responsible leader. And part of that responsible leadership is not just for your own team, but it is, how does your team affect the rest of the world, and are you making the most positive impact? And obviously, again, it's always a balance. But I think one thing that we've learned is that it's very, very possible to balance those two things together, make a very positive impact and be very successful. And so, Aryeh, I really want to thank you for coming on this show. It was really, really fantastic. I have the most important question that I have to ask, which is 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Right. So that's a difficult one, Michael.
Yes.
So I would say optimism is one, definitely. Love from every angle, and I guess communication. I'm a communicator, and I believe in communication.
Aryeh, thank you very, very much. This was wonderful. Thank you for spending this time with me, and stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. You too. Stay safe and stay sane.